She was alone at the station with her children, until a stranger appeared and changed everything. Mary Elizabeth held the cold hands of her two children while counting the coins for the 10th time. The money wouldn't be enough for 3 tickets to Williamsburg. She had sold the last chicken eggs at the market, but they were still short a few dollars. "Mommy, when is Daddy coming back?" asked little Pete, the youngest, tugging at the hem of her dress. "Soon, my son. Soon," she replied, trying to hide the distress in her voice. Emma Grace, the 8-year-old girl, remained silent. Since her father had left 3 months ago, she hardly spoke. She just observed everything with those big, sad eyes that seemed to understand more than they should for her age. The fine rain continued to fall over the Lexington station, and the July cold cut like a razor. Mary pulled the shawl closer to her face and hugged the children. The last train to Williamsburg would pass in 1 hour. If they couldn't board, they would have to sleep right there on the station bench. That's when she heard the sound of horse hooves on the wet stones. A tall man wearing a Virginia Western Railroad uniform approached slowly. His eyes met hers for a moment before he dismounted. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said, tipping his cap in a respectful bow. "I'm John Baptist Smith, railroad inspector. Are you waiting for the train?" Mary hesitated. She didn't know that man, and she had learned to distrust strangers, especially after Anthony left, leaving so many unanswered questions. "Yes, sir." "And where are you planning to travel?" "Williamsburg," she answered softly. John Baptist observed the drenched and shivering children. He noticed how Mary firmly held a small cloth bag where she kept the coins. "The train is delayed because of the rain," he said. "It might take 2 more hours to arrive." Mary's heart tightened. 2 hours. The children were already exhausted and hungry. Little Pete started coughing, that dry cough that had worried her for days. "Ladies and gentlemen," shouted the station employee, "the 3 o'clock train to Williamsburg has been cancelled due to weather conditions. The next one will be tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. Mary felt her world collapsing. They had nowhere to spend the night, no money for a boarding house, and the children were already sick from the cold. John Baptist noticed the despair on her face. There was something about that family that touched him deeply. Perhaps it was the dignity with which the woman faced adversity, or the protective way she held her children. "Ma'am, if I may," he began cautiously, "I have a wagon here. I can take you to Williamsburg. The road is rough, but it's safer than spending the night here." Mary looked up, surprised. Why would that stranger offer help? Nobody did anything for free in those difficult times. "You don't have to, sir. Thank you anyway." "Mommy, I'm so cold," murmured little Pete, nestling closer in her lap. John Baptist saw the woman's internal struggle. Wounded pride fought against the practical need to protect her children. "Ma'am, I have 2 daughters the same age as these children," he said, his voice softer. "If they were in the same situation, I would want someone to offer help." Something in the sincerity of those words touched Mary. She looked at her children's pale little faces and made a decision. "All right, but I'll pay for the ride. That won't be necessary. I insist." John Baptist smiled for the first time. There was a strength in that woman that he admired. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. He helped Mary Elizabeth and the children into the wagon, laid a heavy canvas over them to protect them from the rain, and set off on the journey. During the trip, which normally would take 2 hours, they spoke little. John asked about her husband, and Mary Elizabeth simply said he had traveled for work. "Which part of Williamsburg are you headed to?" "Mercy Street, number 47. It's my Aunt Beatrice's house." John knew the street. It was a humble area, mainly inhabited by railroad workers and small shopkeepers. When they arrived at the address, they knocked on the door several times, but no one answered. "It seems there's no one here," said John, concerned. An elderly neighbor appeared at the window of the house next door. "If you're looking for Mrs. Beatrice, she left yesterday for Charlottesville. Her sister is in very poor health." Mary Elizabeth felt her legs go weak. There was nowhere to go. Her aunt was her only relative in the area, and now she found herself completely helpless with 2 small children in a city she barely knew. "And when is she coming back?" asked John. Only God knows, young man. It could be next week, it could be next month. Her sister is beyond hope. John watched despair grow on Mary Elizabeth's face. The children began to cry softly, sensing the adult's tension. "Ma'am," he hesitated. "I have a property a few miles from here. There's a small house that was being used by the caretaker, but he moved out last month. You and the children can stay there until you sort things out." Mary Elizabeth stared at him with renewed suspicion. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." "Perhaps exactly for that reason," replied John with disarming honesty. "Sometimes we help strangers more easily than people close to us because we don't expect anything in return." The rain started up again heavily, and little Pete began to tremble violently. Mary Elizabeth made another decision that would change the course of their lives. "All right, but it's only for a few days, until I get organized." John's property was in a quiet, rural area. The main house was modest but well kept, and the caretaker's cottage, though small, was clean and dry. There were 2 simple beds, a wood stove, and a wooden table. "Tomorrow, my wife, Mrs. Eunice, will come by with some things you might need," said John. "She's a teacher and loves children very much." "We don't want charity," Mary Elizabeth said, more harshly than she intended. "And it's not charity. I need someone to look after the garden and the chickens. If you're willing, you can work for me. I'll pay a fair wage plus housing." Mary Elizabeth remained silent for a long moment. The offer seemed too good to be true. "What's your interest in all this?" she finally asked. John scratched his beard for a few seconds before answering. "My family has problems, ma'am. My wife, she lost a baby a few months ago and has been very sad ever since. Maybe having children around will help her, and maybe you'll help each other too." The raw honesty of that confession disarmed Mary Elizabeth. For the first time in months, she felt that perhaps she wasn't alone in the world. That night, after putting the children to sleep, Mary Elizabeth stood looking out the small window of the cottage. The moon appeared between the clouds, illuminating the property. She thought of Anthony, wondering where he might be at that moment. 3 months without news, 3 months raising the children alone, 3 months making up excuses for the children's questions. The next day, Mrs. Eunice arrived early, bringing fresh milk, homemade bread and clothes that her daughters had left behind when they married. She was a woman in her 50s, with greying hair tied in a bun and gentle eyes that held a deep sadness. "Good morning, Mary Elizabeth," she said, using her first name without ceremony. "John told me about you all. Welcome." Emma Grace and little Pete were shy at first, but soon they were charmed by Eunice's kindness. She brought corn dolls she had made and a wooden horse for little Pete. "The children seem to need medical care," observed Eunice, noticing little Pete's paleness and persistent cough. "I don't have money for a doctor," confessed Mary. "Dr. Sebastian is our friend. He doesn't charge needy families." Mary was beginning to wonder if those people really existed, or if she was dreaming. So much kindness seemed unreal. Dr. Sebastian Figgis was a young man who had studied medicine in New York City and returned to the countryside to care for the poorest. He examined the children with affection and diagnosed a mild pneumonia in little Pete. "Nothing serious, but he needs care, rest, proper nutrition, and this syrup twice a day," he said, handing a bottle to Mary. "Doctor, I can't pay." "Who said anything about payment?" He smiled. "When you can, you pay me. And if you never can, it's fine. My duty is to care for those in need." Gradually, Mary adapted to the farm's routine. She tended the garden with dedication, fed the chickens, and even learned to make cheese with Eunice. The children regained their color and started playing again. John watched this transformation from afar. There was something about Mary that intrigued him. She was young, beautiful, but carried a weight on her shoulders that went beyond the responsibility of raising 2 children alone. There were secrets there, he was sure. One afternoon, while Mary was in the garden, John approached to talk. "How are you feeling here?" "Well, thank you for everything. Mary, may I ask a personal question?" She stopped weeding and looked at him. "Your husband, is he really traveling for work?" The silence that followed was eloquent. Mary lowered her eyes and continued weeding with more vigor. He left. Left for where? I don't know. John felt a tightness in his chest. He knew that pain, the confusion of being abandoned without explanations. How long ago? 3 months and 2 days. The precision of the answer showed how each day of absence was counted and felt. Did he leave any explanation? Mary stopped working again. When she raised her face, John saw tears streaming down her cheeks. A letter saying he needed to leave and couldn't explain why. He promised he would return, but you don't believe it anymore. How can I believe? 3 months, John. 3 months without a word, without knowing if he's alive or... She couldn't finish the sentence. John wanted to hug her, to comfort that pain he knew well. His own wife had lost a child, and since then lived as if a part of her had left too. Mary, have you thought that maybe he's prevented from returning or sending news? I have, but I've also thought that maybe he found another life, another family. Maybe he got tired of us. A man doesn't abandon 2 beautiful children and a wife like you without a very strong reason. Mary blushed at the indirect compliment. You don't know me. Maybe I was a terrible wife. By the children you've raised, I see what kind of person you are. At that moment, Eunice appeared carrying a basket of washed clothes. Mary, dear, I need to talk to you about something. John stepped away, realizing the 2 women needed to talk alone. What is it, Eunice? It's about the children. They need to study. Emma Grace is at the right age to start reading and writing. I know, but I can't pay for a school. Who said anything about paying? I'm a teacher, remember? I can teach them right here. Mary was moved. It was another kindness from those extraordinary people. Why do you do all this for us? Eunice sat beside her on the bench John had placed under the jaboticaba tree. Mary, you give me back the will to live. Since I lost my son, I've been living like a ghost. Taking care of your children reminds me of life's purpose. Did you have other children? 3 daughters, all married and living far away. The youngest is in Boston, the middle one in New Orleans, and the oldest went to New York City with her husband. Our youngest, her voice broke, was born premature in January, lived only 2 days. Mary held Eunice's hand. I'm so sorry. John can't talk about it. He pretends he's fine, but I see the pain in his eyes. Having you here gives us a new chance to be useful, to care for someone. The 2 women embraced, united by grief and the hope of mutual healing. The weeks passed quickly. Emma Grace learned to read her first words, and little Pete recovered completely from pneumonia. Mary developed a pleasant routine caring for the property and discovered she had a talent for growing vegetables. That's when the first letter arrived. John brought the mail one September afternoon. The envelope was addressed to Mary Elizabeth Silver Smith at Aunt Beatrice's address, but with a note. Please deliver to the family caring for Mr. John Baptist Smith's property. Someone knows you're here, said John, handing over the letter with a worried expression. Mary recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Anthony. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope. The letter was short. My dear Mary, I know you're angry with me and have every right to be. I can't explain yet why I had to leave, but you must believe it was to protect you and the children. I'm well and thinking of you every day. I found out where you are, and I'm happy to know you found good people to help you. I haven't tried direct contact because it's still not safe. Soon, everything will be clarified. Kiss Emma Grace and little Pete for me. With love, Anthony. Mary reread the letter several times. There were more questions than answers there. What does he mean by not safe? She asked John, who had read the letter over her shoulder. I don't know, but it seems your husband is involved in some complicated situation. What kind of situation? Mary, do you know his work well? He was a clerk at the Lexington City Hall, handled land documentation and taxes. John became thoughtful. Working with land documentation could involve many irregularities, especially during a time when corruption was rampant in small country towns. Maybe he discovered something he shouldn't have and needed to leave town to protect himself. But why didn't he take me with him? Perhaps to protect you. If he's being threatened, the family would be an easy target. The explanation made sense, but it didn't lessen Mary's pain. Regardless of the reason, she had spent months in anguish, not knowing if her husband was alive. That night, Emma Grace asked a question that took everyone by surprise. "Mummy, did Daddy do something wrong?" "Why do you ask that, dear?" "Because before he left, he was very nervous. He received some letters that made him pale with fear, and one night I heard him talking to you about telling the truth before it was too late." Mary was shocked. She didn't know her daughter had noticed the signs of tension preceding Anthony's departure. "Do you remember anything else, Emma Grace?" "I remember he burned some papers in the backyard and said that if anyone asked about him, you should say he'd traveled for work." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. John and Mary exchanged meaningful looks. The situation was more complicated than they had imagined. "Emma Grace," said John, crouching to the girl's height, "it's very important that you tell us everything you remember from the last days before your father left." The girl became thoughtful for a few moments. "He had a strange visitor, a very elegant man, but he spoke harshly to Daddy. I was hiding behind the door and heard them arguing about money and about doing the right thing. Do you remember that man's name? Daddy called him Colonel something, Colonel Augustus, I think." Mary paled. She knew that name. Colonel Augustus Pearson was the wealthiest and most powerful man in Lexington, owner of huge farms with political influence that reached all the way to the capital. "Mary, do you know this man?" asked John, noticing her reaction. "By name, yes, he's complicated. They say nobody gets that rich by being honest." "What else do you know about him?" "That he does business with the city hall. He always gets tax reductions, easy ways to buy unclaimed lands, that kind of thing." John began putting together the puzzle pieces. A city hall clerk who handled land documentation, an influential colonel with suspicious business dealings, and a sudden escape after an argument about doing the right thing. "Mary, I think your husband discovered some corruption scheme involving this Colonel Augustus and is now being threatened to keep silent. But then why didn't he go to the authorities?" "What authorities? If the colonel has political influence, who would guarantee Anthony's safety? Sometimes running away is the only option." The theory made sense, but raised an even more worrying question. If Anthony was being pursued, Mary and the children could also be in danger. "John, do you think we're safe here?" "For now, yes. Nobody knows exactly where you are besides your husband, and he wouldn't reveal your location if it put you at risk." During the following days, an underlying tension hung over the property. John became more attentive to strange movements in the area, and Mary startled at any unexpected noise. It was Eunice who brought disturbing information. She had gone to town for shopping and overheard conversations at the pharmacy. "They're looking for a woman with 2 children, she said worriedly. "They said it's a family matter, but the description matched you." "Who's looking?" asked Mary, feeling her fear grow. "They couldn't say exactly, just that a well-dressed man has been asking questions around the region." John made a quick decision. "Mary, you and the children will stay in the main house with us for a few days. It's safer. I don't want to cause trouble for you." "You're not causing trouble. We chose to help, and we'll keep helping until the end." The couple's solidarity moved Mary deeply. In just a few months they had become more family to her than many blood relatives. That night in the main house, the children slept in John and Eunice's daughter's room, while Mary stayed in the guest room. Around midnight they were awakened by furious barking from the dogs. John got up slowly, took the shotgun he kept behind the door and went to the window. 3 men on horseback were surrounding the property, clearly looking for something or someone. "Stay quiet," he whispered to the women and children. The men came up to the main house and knocked hard on the door. "Open up, we know there are people in there." John waited a few seconds before responding, pretending he had just woken up. "Who's there? What do you want at this hour?" "We're looking for a woman with 2 children. We know she's in this area. Only my wife and I live here. There's no woman with children. We're coming in to check. Not without a warrant. This is my private property." There was murmuring among the men outside. After a few minutes they moved away, but John was certain they would keep watching. "They'll be back," he said quietly to Mary. "We need to come up with a plan." Maybe it's better if I turn myself in. I don't want you to get hurt because of me. Don't even think about it. If they're looking for you so insistently, it's because you pose some danger to them. And people who are dangerous to powerful men usually don't end up well. Eunice had an idea. Mary, do you know how to sew? Yes, I do. Then come work with me at the school. I'll say you're my new assistant who came from Goldtown. We'll change your appearance a bit, you'll use another name, and no one will suspect. But the children are your niece and nephew you're raising after their parents passed away. A sad story, but common in these times. The plan was risky, but it seemed to be the only alternative. Mary cut her hair, changed her style of dressing, and took on the name Beatrice Mary in honor of the aunt she couldn't find. Eunice's school was in town and served about 30 children from simple families. Mary quickly adapted to teaching sewing and embroidery to the older girls, while Emma Grace and little Pete blended naturally with the other students. For 3 weeks, the strategy worked perfectly. Mary had found a new routine and even started to feel useful again. The children were happy at school, making friends for the first time since they arrived in the area. That's when the second letter from Anthony arrived. This time, the letter was delivered directly to the school by a street boy who said he was paid by a man to make the delivery. Mary, the situation is getting more complicated. They found out where you were, and now they're actively looking for you. Don't trust anyone you haven't known for a long time. Colonel Augustus has a lot of influence, and people working for him throughout the region. I've managed to get some evidence of what he's been doing, but I need more time to gather enough material. When I have everything, I'll go to the authorities in Boston, where he doesn't have as much power. Take care, I love you. Anthony Mary showed the letter to John and Eunice that same night. At least now we know your suspicion was right, said John. Your husband really discovered something about this colonel, and is trying to gather evidence. But that means the danger is real, added Eunice. If they found out where Mary was before, they might find out again. We need to be even more careful, agreed John, and maybe it's time to involve someone trustworthy who can help us. Who do you have in mind? Dr. Sebastian. He has contacts in Boston and could be a bridge to the state authorities when Anthony is ready. Dr. Sebastian was shocked when he learned about Mary's situation. As a doctor, he was used to keeping secrets, but this was more serious than anything he had ever faced. Colonel Augustus Pearson, he murmured thoughtfully. There have been rumors about him for years. They say he gets unclaimed land for ridiculous prices because he has insider information about the lots that will be auctioned. How would that work? Asked Mary. Simple. Someone inside the city hall informs him about which lands will be put up for auction, and he buys them in advance from the occupants for very low prices, claiming they will be expropriated. Then, at the official auction, he bids for almost nothing because he's already the only interested party. And the former owners end up with nothing? Exactly. It's a cruel scheme, but very profitable. John shook his head, outraged. And if Anthony discovered this scheme through the City Hall documents, he could prove that the colonel has insider information and is harming entire families, completed Dr. Sebastian. But why doesn't the colonel just kill Anthony to get rid of the problem? Asked Mary, her voice trembling. Because if Anthony dies or disappears right after discovering the scheme, it becomes too obvious. It's better to keep him on the run and silent through threats to his family. The explanation was logical, but it didn't reassure Mary. Her husband was living as a fugitive because of a powerful man's greed. Dr. Sebastian, you said you have contacts in Boston. What kind of contacts? I studied medicine there and have friends who work in the state government. There are also some public prosecutors known for taking on corruption cases, even when they involve influential people. Could you send a message to Anthony through Mary? Tell him we're gathering support for when he's ready? I can try, but how do we get in touch with him? That was a good question. Anthony seemed to know where they were, but they had no way to contact him. Maybe he'll show up again, said Mary, hopefully. If he managed to deliver 2 letters, he might manage a third. Or maybe we should try to find him, suggested John. That would be too dangerous, said Dr. Sebastian. If we start looking for him, we might lead the colonel's men right to where he's hiding. They decided to wait for new signs from Anthony while strengthening security at the school and the property. John got a favor from a friend who worked at the telegraph office and set up a discreet communication system with Dr. Sebastian in case of emergency. Weeks passed without news until something unexpected happened. Emma Grace, who had always been an observant child, made a disturbing discovery. "Aunt Beatrice," she said one afternoon, using the fake name Mary had adopted, "that man who comes to pick up Mr. Jerome's children every day, he's not their father." "What do you mean, dear?" "I heard the boys talking. They said their real father is traveling and that man is just taking care of them for a while." Mary immediately became alert. Children being picked up from school by men who weren't their fathers could be a sign that someone was using the students to gather information. "Emma Grace, have you noticed anything else strange at school? There's a lady who stands outside sometimes watching the children play, but when I wave to her she leaves." Mary told these observations to Eunice, who became worried. "I need to talk to John and Dr. Sebastian about this," she said. "If someone is watching the school, our cover might be compromised." That night the three adults met to discuss the situation. "I have an idea," said Dr. Sebastian. "I'll pretend that Mary is a relative of mine who came to help with some patients. That would give us an excuse for her to move into my house, which is in town and harder to watch." "But what about the children?" "They stay at school as usual during the day, and at night they come to my house too. My housekeeper, Mrs. Rose, has always wanted to have children around." The plan seemed safe, but Mary hesitated. "We've already caused you so much trouble." "Mary," said John firmly, "you need to understand one thing. We chose to help you. It's not trouble, it's a choice. And when we choose to help, we see it through to the end." These words touched Mary deeply. It had been a long time since she felt she had people she could completely trust. The move to Dr. Sebastian's house happened discreetly on a November dawn. The house was comfortable, with a large backyard where the children could play without being seen from the street. Mrs. Rose, the housekeeper, was a woman about 60 years old who had lost her own children when they were young due to a yellow fever epidemic decades before. She welcomed Emma Grace and little Pete as if they were her own grandchildren. "It's so good to have children in this house again," she said, emotionally. "It's been so long since I've heard children's laughter in here." Dr. Sebastian officially made Mary Elizabeth his assistant, teaching her to help with simple bandages and organize medicines. She showed a natural talent for caring for people and soon became beloved by the patients. It was during one of these activities that Mary Elizabeth made a surprising discovery. An elderly lady had arrived at the office with an infected wound on her leg. While Dr. Sebastian was tending to the bandage, the woman started talking. "Doctor, the city has become very dangerous for us poor folks. Some people are losing their little plots of land because of rich people's trickery." "How so, Mrs. Josephine?" "The other day, a well-dressed man came to my house saying my little lot was going to be taken by the government. He offered me a pittance for it, saying I'd better accept before I ended up with nothing." Mary Elizabeth stopped organizing the medicines and paid attention to the conversation. "And did you accept?" No. My late husband left me that land as our family's only possession, but I'm afraid. The man said if I didn't sell willingly, it would be taken by force." "Do you remember that man's name?" "He introduced himself as a representative of Colonel Augustus Pearson." Mary Elizabeth and Dr. Sebastian exchanged meaningful looks. "Mrs. Josephine," said Dr. Sebastian carefully, "is your land actually scheduled to be expropriated by the government?" "I don't know, Doctor. I never received any official papers. Only that man's word." "Did you keep his name, or have any way to prove he was there?" "I have the little letter he left me with his name, and the amount he was offering." Mary Elizabeth felt her heart race. This could be the proof Anthony was trying to gather. "Mrs. Josephine, you don't know me, but I can assure you your land will only be expropriated if there's an official government document. No private individual can take someone else's land." "But he said he lied to deceive you. It's a scam that's been happening in the area." The woman became indignant. "So you mean they're trying to steal from me?" "Exactly. And not just you. Several families must be going through the same situation. Dr. Sebastian had an idea. "Mrs. Josephine, would you be willing to help us expose this scam?" "How do you mean, Doctor?" "If you pretend you're going to accept the offer, we can document everything and use it as evidence against them." "Isn't it dangerous?" "A little, but with the right precautions we can protect you." Mary Elizabeth admired the woman's courage in agreeing to help, even though she was afraid. During the following days, Dr. Sebastian and Mary Elizabeth developed a careful plan. Mrs. Josephine would meet again with the Colonel's representative, but this time with hidden witnesses and prepared documents. John lent his experience as a railroad inspector to organize the technical details of the plan. He knew the laws about expropriation and could identify exactly where the scheme's illegality lay. "The trick is simple," he explained. "They make people believe they're going to lose their lands anyway, so it's better to accept some money than end up with nothing. But without an official decree of public utility, no one can be forced to sell." "And how do we know there's no such decree?" asked Mary Elizabeth. "Because expropriation decrees are published in the official gazette. It's the law. If there were one, everyone would know." The meeting between Mrs. Josephine and the Colonel's representative was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon at her own house. Dr. Sebastian positioned himself in the neighboring house, which was empty, to listen and document the conversation. Mary Elizabeth stayed with the children at John and Eunice's house, anxious about the outcome. The man who appeared at Mrs. Josephine's house was exactly as she had described, well-dressed, with smooth speech but hard eyes. He identified himself as Sebastian Moore, attorney for Colonel Augustus Pearson. "So, Mrs. Josephine, have you thought about our proposal?" "Yes, I have, Mr. Sebastian, but I have a doubt." "What doubt?" "How can I be sure that my land will really be taken by the government?" The man hesitated for a moment. "Don't you trust the Colonel's word?" "Yes, I do. But my late husband always said that documents are what matter. Do you have the government paper saying they'll take my land?" "Mrs. Josephine, these papers are very complicated. You wouldn't understand even if I showed them." "But I have a nephew who reads well. He could explain it to me." Dr. Sebastian, listening from the next house, admired the lady's cleverness in pressuring the man. "Look, Mrs. Josephine, I'll be frank with you. The decree hasn't been issued yet, but it will be. I have reliable information from inside the government. That's why I'm offering this money before it's too late." "Ah, so the paper hasn't come out yet?" "No, but it will. And when it does, you'll get nothing. Zero. So it's better to accept our offer." Dr. Sebastian smiled. The man had just confessed that there was no official expropriation, but that he had reliable information from inside the government about something that will happen. It was exactly the proof of insider information they needed. "How much time do you give me to decide?" asked Mrs. Josephine. "1 week. After that, the offer is no longer valid." "All right. In a week, I'll give you my answer." When the man left, Dr. Sebastian waited a few minutes before meeting with Mrs. Josephine. "You were perfect," he said, moved. "We got exactly what we needed." "And now?" "Now we'll document all of this and send it to the authorities in Boston. With luck, this will be the beginning of the end of the Colonel's scheme." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. That night, Dr. Sebastian wrote a detailed report about what he had witnessed and sent it by telegraph to his contacts in the capital. The response came the next day. The authorities were interested, but they needed more evidence before acting against a man as powerful as Colonel Augustus. It was then that the third letter from Anthony arrived. This time the letter was delivered by a priest who said he had been approached by a man who seemed afraid and asked to deliver the correspondence. "Dear Mary, I've obtained documents that prove the land scheme, but I discovered something much worse. The Colonel isn't just stealing land. He's diverting money from municipal taxes to buy land in other states. It's a lot of money, Mary, a lot of public money. But I also found out that he's planning to leave the country. There's a ship scheduled to depart from New Orleans in the next fortnight. If he escapes, we'll never be able to prove it. I need to deliver the evidence to the authorities in the next few days, but I'm being watched very closely. If anything happens to me, the evidence is hidden in the place where we played when we were children. You remember? Take care. I love all of you. Anthony. Mary was confused by the last part of the letter. The place where we played when we were children. What place is that? Asked Dr. Sebastian. Anthony and I met in Lexington when we were little. We played in a place. She stopped, remembering. The cave behind Rosary Church. We always hid there when we were mischievous. Do you think he hid the evidence there? That must be it. But if he's being watched, how will we retrieve the documents without being noticed? John had an idea. I'll go. As a railroad inspector, I have legitimate reasons to be in Lexington. I can say I'm checking problems on the line. It's too dangerous, said Mary. Less dangerous than leaving the evidence there until the colonel finds out where it is. Dr. Sebastian agreed with the plan. And I'm going with you. As a doctor, I can say I was called to attend to an urgent patient. Both of you, won't that draw more attention? Actually, no, explained John. It's common for doctors to travel with railroad employees when there are accidents or emergencies along the line. They prepared the trip carefully. John obtained an official authorization to inspect the railway line in Lexington, and Dr. Sebastian forged an emergency medical call. They left in the early hours of a Thursday, leaving Mary with Eunice and Mrs. Rose. The hours of waiting were the longest of Mary's life. In Lexington, John and Dr. Sebastian first attended to their official appointments to establish their presence in the city. Only in the late afternoon did they discreetly meet near Rosary Church. The grotto that Mary had mentioned was in a densely wooded area behind the church. It was a place where few people usually went, especially at dusk. They found a leather bag buried under some loose stones at the bottom of the grotto. Inside it were dozens of documents, correspondence between the colonel and City Hall employees, land purchase receipts, bank transfer records, and even threatening letters sent to people who refused to sell their properties. This is pure dynamite, murmured Dr. Sebastian, flipping through the papers. With this evidence, the colonel will go straight to jail. And now, do we go back or hand over the evidence right here? Better to go back. If we hand it over here, we might be giving it to people who work for the colonel. In Boston, we have a better chance of finding honest authorities. The return trip was tense. At every station, they expected to see the colonel's men boarding the train to search for them. But they arrived safely in Williamsburg late at night. Mary was moved to see the documents that Anthony had gathered, risking his own life. Look here, she said, showing one of the letters. Here the colonel promises the mayor 10% of everything he earns from the land sales in exchange for privileged information. And here, added Dr. Sebastian, there's a record of a transfer of nearly $20,000 from the municipal coffers to the colonel's personal account. $20,000, exclaimed John. That's enough money to build a new school or a hospital. Everyone's outrage grew as they examined the evidence. Colonel Augustus wasn't just stealing land from poor families, but also diverting money that should have been used to improve people's lives. Now I understand why Anthony had to flee, said Mary. If he tried to report this in Lexington, he would never be heard. The colonel must have allies everywhere. And that's why he said he was going to hand over the evidence in Boston, added Dr. Sebastian. There the colonel's power is weaker. But if he's being watched, how will he manage to get to Boston? This question hung in the air without an immediate answer. It was Eunice who suggested a solution. What if we take the evidence to Boston? If Anthony is being watched, but we're not, we can file the report on his behalf. Would a report filed by third parties be accepted? If the evidence is solid, it doesn't matter who files the report, said Dr. Sebastian. The important thing is to reach the right people. They decided that Dr. Sebastian would travel to Boston at the beginning of the following week. He had contacts at the medical college who could introduce him to the appropriate authorities. But before they could execute the plan, they received an unexpected visit. It was Monday morning when there was a knock on Dr. Sebastian's door. Mary Elizabeth was giving a sewing lesson to Emma Grace when Mrs. Rose announced that there was a man asking to speak with the doctor. He's a well-dressed gentleman, but he looks like he means business, she said, worried. Dr. Sebastian went to see him and was surprised to find a man who introduced himself as the regional detective from Boston. Dr. Sebastian Figgis. That's me. I'm Detective Anthony Charles Rivers. I've received information that you're in possession of documents related to administrative irregularities in Lexington. Dr. Sebastian was confused. How could the detective know about the documents? May I ask who gave you this information? A man named Anthony Joseph Smith. He came to see me yesterday in Boston, saying he had delivered important evidence to you. Dr. Sebastian's heart raced. Anthony had managed to reach the authorities. Where is he now? In a safe place. But I need the evidence to start the legal process against Colonel Augustus Pearson. Dr. Sebastian hesitated. How could he be sure this man was really a detective and not someone working for the colonel? Do you have any identification? The man showed an official document that seemed legitimate. Dr. Sebastian, I understand your caution, but time is against us. We've learned that the colonel plans to leave the country in a few days. If we don't act quickly, he'll escape. And Anthony, how can I be sure he's really okay? He asked me to say some specific words so the family would know the message really comes from him. The detective took a piece of paper from his pocket. He said, "Tell Mary Elizabeth that I remember her playing with dolls in the cave behind the church, and that the blue dress she wore at our wedding is still the most beautiful I've ever seen." Mary Elizabeth, who was listening from the next room, began to cry. They were details only Anthony could know. "Is he all right?" she asked, appearing at the door. "He's fine and eager to reunite with his family, but first we need to arrest the colonel." Dr. Sebastian went to get the documents. When he handed the leather bag to the detective, he felt a mix of relief and apprehension. How long will it take to arrest the colonel? If all goes well today, we already have an arrest warrant prepared. We were just waiting for the evidence. And when can we see Anthony? As soon as the colonel is arrested. For safety, he's being kept in a protected place until we resolve this situation. The detective left with the documents, promising news soon. The hours that followed were filled with extreme anxiety. Mary Elizabeth couldn't concentrate on anything. The children noticed the adults' tension, and everyone waited for news. Late in the afternoon, a telegram arrived from Boston. Colonel Augustus Pearson arrested. Operation successful. Anthony free to return. Detective Rivers. The joy was universal. Mary Elizabeth cried with relief, the children shouted with happiness, and John and Eunice hugged emotionally. "When is he coming?" asked Emma Grace. "Soon, my dear, soon." But Anthony didn't arrive the next day, nor the day after. A week passed with no news, and the anxiety grew again. It was Dr. Sebastian who decided to investigate. He sent a telegram to Boston asking for information about when Anthony would return. The reply was disconcerting. "We have no information about Anthony Joseph Smith. Please clarify what this is about. Detective Anthony Charles Rivers." Dr. Sebastian read the telegram several times before understanding the implication. "Mary Elizabeth," he said, his voice trembling, "I think we've been deceived." "What do you mean?" "The man who was here, he wasn't a detective, or at least he wasn't Detective Rivers. But he knew details only Anthony could know. Maybe he got that information some other way." The possibility that they had been deceived and had handed over the only evidence against the colonel to an imposter was devastating. John suggested they go personally to Boston to clarify the situation. If the real detective knows nothing, then the evidence is in the wrong hands. And Anthony? Where could he be? This question haunted Mary. If the man who posed as the detective worked for the colonel, Anthony could be in grave danger. The trip to Boston was tense. Mary insisted on going along, leaving the children with Mrs. Rose and Eunice. In the capital, they managed to speak directly with Detective Anthony Charles Rivers. He confirmed that he had never been to Williamsburg and did not know anyone named Anthony Joseph Smith. "But there was indeed an operation against a colonel from Lexington," he said. "Last week we arrested Augustus Pearson for forming a gang and forging documents." "So he was really arrested?" "Yes, but not for the reasons you think. We discovered he was forging death certificates to steal land from families whose heads had passed away. A completely different scheme from what you described." Mary was confused. "But then what happened to the evidence we handed over?" "What evidence? I never received any evidence from you." Dr. Sebastian explained the whole story to the detective, from Anthony's escape to the delivery of the documents to the fake officer. "From what you describe," said the detective, "the man who impersonated me was collecting information about what you knew. He probably works for someone interested in finding out what evidence Anthony had gathered." "But who could that someone be?" "It could be the colonel himself, trying to uncover what was raised against him. Or it could be someone else involved in the scheme. And my husband, what happened to him? Unfortunately, I have no information about him, but if he really exists and was investigating the colonel, he might be hiding of his own will." The trip back to Williamsburg was gloomy. Mary felt guilty for believing the impostor and losing the only evidence against the real culprits. "Don't blame yourself," said Dr. Sebastian. "The man knew intimate details about you and Anthony. It was impossible not to believe him. But now we have nothing left, and Anthony is still missing." "Perhaps we don't have the original evidence," said John, "but we know a lot about the scheme, and we have Mrs. Josephine's testimony." "Do you think that would be enough?" "To start an official investigation, yes." Back in Williamsburg, they decided to approach Detective Rivers again, but this time with a different strategy. Instead of handing over ready evidence, they would report the scheme and let the authorities conduct their own investigation. Dr. Sebastian prepared a formal complaint detailing the fraudulent land purchase scheme and including Mrs. Josephine's testimony. He also mentioned Anthony's existence as a possible additional witness. While awaiting the outcome of the official complaint, something unexpected happened. Emma Grace, who had always been very observant, made an intriguing discovery. "Aunt Beatrice," she said one afternoon, "do you remember that man who said he was a detective?" "I do, dear. Why?" "I saw him again." "What do you mean? Where?" "At the market, talking to the man who sells cheeses. They were talking about someone who was causing trouble and needed to be convinced to keep quiet." Mary felt a chill. If the fake detective was still in the area, it meant the danger hadn't passed. "Emma Grace, are you sure it was the same man?" "Absolutely. He has a small scar on his chin that I noticed when he was at our house." Dr. Sebastian decided to investigate discreetly. He went to the market the next day and managed to identify the cheese seller Emma Grace had mentioned. The man, named Joe Smith, was known to be an incorrigible gossip. With a bit of casual conversation, Dr. Sebastian managed to get valuable information. "Oh, the doctor is talking about that Theodore," said Joe. "That man has been showing up around here for some time. He says he's from Boston, but by the accent, I'd say he's more from Lexington, really." "Do you know what he's been doing here?" "I don't know, Doctor, but he asks a lot of questions about families that recently arrived in the area. Wants to know who they are, where they came from, those sorts of things." "What kind of families?" "Mainly women with small children who came without their husbands." Dr. Sebastian felt the danger growing. The man was clearly looking for Mary and the children. "Joe, did this Theodore say anything about coming back?" "He said he'd stay around here a few more days. He's staying at Mrs. Carmen's boarding house." With that information, Dr. Sebastian quickly returned home and gathered everyone for an urgent conversation. "The imposter is still in town," he announced, "and he's specifically looking for families like yours." "What do we do?" asked Mary. "First, you need to leave here again. It's not safe to stay where he can find you." "Where will we go this time?" It was Eunice who suggested a solution. "My sister Grace lives on an isolated farm 2 days' journey from here. She would be happy to have you for a while. But that would mean taking the children out of school, away from the routine they've built." "Mary," said John firmly, "routine we can rebuild, life we can't get back." The hard truth of those words convinced Mary. They left that same night, taking advantage of the darkness to avoid being seen. Eunice's sister's farm was in a mountainous and hard-to-reach area. Grace Revelation was a woman of about 40 who had been widowed young and ran the property with the help of 2 loyal employees. "Welcome," she said, embracing Mary and the children. "Eunice told me a bit about your situation. Here you are safe." Life on the isolated farm was peaceful, but Mary couldn't shake her anguish about Anthony. It had been over 4 months since his last letter, and the uncertainty about his fate consumed her. It was during one of those sleepless nights that she heard footsteps in the yard. Grace had also heard and got up to check. "Who's there?" she shouted from the window. "It's me, Grace. John Baptist." Mary felt her heart race. If John had come there in the middle of the night, it could only be something very important. "John, what happened?" asked Grace, opening the door. "I need to speak with Mary. It's about Anthony." Mary came running, still in her nightgown. "Is he all right? Where is he?" "Calm down, Mary. He's fine, and he's here." "Here where?" "Here in the area. He came to me last night. He had been hiding in a cave in the mountains for weeks, waiting for a safe opportunity to make contact." "Why didn't he come directly here?" "Because he was being followed. But he managed to lose his pursuers and is now free to reunite with his family." Mary couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Where is he now?" "Just a few kilometers from here. He said he would come at dawn so as not to scare the children by arriving in the middle of the night." The hours until dawn were the longest of Mary's life. She woke Emma, Grace and little Pete to tell them their father was coming back, and the children were thrilled. When the sun rose and she saw a familiar figure walking down the road toward the farm, Mary ran as she had never run in her life. The reunion was emotional. Anthony was thinner and had a grown-out beard, but they were the same loving eyes she remembered. The children threw themselves into his arms, crying with joy. "Daddy, you took so long," said little Pete, hugging him tightly. "Sorry, my son." Daddy had some very important things to sort out before coming back. "And now you won't leave any more?" asked Emma Grace. "Never again, my child, never again." During the following days, Anthony told the whole story of his escape and the investigations he had conducted. "When I uncovered the Colonel's scheme, I tried to report it within the town hall itself," he explained, "but I found out that half of the employees were involved, some out of greed, others out of fear." "So that's why you had to flee?" "Exactly. I received direct threats. They said that if I spoke up, you would pay the price." "But you managed to gather the evidence anyway." "I did, but not the ones you found in the cave. Those were only a part. I kept the main ones with me the whole time." Mary was surprised. "So the evidence we gave to the fake detective was important, but not the definitive ones. I knew there was a risk of them being discovered, so I kept the most incriminating ones hidden. And now, what do we do with them? Now that Colonel Augustus has been arrested on other charges, I can hand over this evidence to strengthen the case against him and all the others involved." Dr. Sebastian was impressed with Anthony's strategy. "You were playing chess while all of us were playing checkers," he said admiringly. "I had no choice. When you're dealing with powerful and corrupt people, you always need to be one step ahead." "And the man who pretended to be a detective?" "Theodore Silver. He's been the Colonel's henchman for years. He must have intercepted some communication of mine and found out where you were. Is he still dangerous?" "Not anymore. With the Colonel in jail, his henchmen are hiding or trying to leave the area." Finally, after months of separation and anguish, the family was reunited and safe. Anthony handed over the definitive evidence to the authorities in Boston, who launched a broad investigation into corruption within the administration of Lexington. Besides Colonel Augustus, several other people were arrested, including the mayor and 3 town hall employees. The scheme had harmed over 50 families over 2 years, embezzling an amount equivalent to the annual budget of a small town. Mary, Anthony, and the children decided not to return to Lexington. The town held too many bad memories, and they had found a new family in Williamsburg. Dr. Sebastian offered Anthony a permanent job as administrator of his clinic, and Mary continued working as an assistant. The children fully adapted to Eunice's school. John and Eunice, in turn, found in Mary and Anthony's family the joy they had lost. They treated Emma Grace and little Pete as grandchildren, and Mary and Anthony as the children they never had close by. Grace also moved to Williamsburg, selling the isolated farm and buying a house near her new friends. Mrs. Rose retired but continued living with Dr. Sebastian and helping to take care of everyone. 1 year after the events, the small community that formed around Mary's family had become an example of solidarity and mutual support. Emma Grace, now 9 years old, was one of the best students at Eunice's school and showed a special talent for mathematics. Little Pete, at 7 years old, was known for his insatiable curiosity and for asking questions that made adults thoughtful. Mary discovered she had an aptitude for nursing and began studying with Dr. Sebastian to become his official assistant. Anthony found satisfaction in managing the clinic and helping needy people receive free medical care. But it was on a Sunday afternoon, almost a year and a half after the first meeting at the station, that the biggest surprise of all happened. Mary was in the vegetable garden at John and Eunice's house when she saw a wagon stopping out front. An elderly lady stepped out, whom she recognized immediately. Aunt Beatrice, the aunt she had never been able to find in Williamsburg, was right there, alive and well. "Mary, my dear, I've been looking everywhere for you. But the neighbor said you had left for Charlottesville." "I did leave, but I came back in 2 weeks. When I arrived, I heard a family had been looking for me. It took me all this time to find out where you were." "How did you find us?" "Through Dr. Sebastian. Someone in town said he was caring for a family with 2 children, and I suspected it might be you." The reunion with her aunt brought unexpected joy. Beatrice explained that her sister in Charlottesville had recovered from her illness and that she had returned to Williamsburg intending to help Mary, as she had promised her father years before. "Your father made me promise I would look after you if you ever needed it," she said emotionally. "And when I found out you were in trouble, I felt guilty for not being here. Aunt, it's not your fault at all. And look how everything turned out well." Beatrice was impressed by the support network Mary had built. "How lucky you were to find such good people." "It wasn't luck, Aunt," said Mary, looking at John, who was playing with the children in the backyard. "It was Providence." That evening, during the dinner that gathered all the important people in Mary's new life, she gave an emotional speech. "A year and a half ago, I was alone at a train station, with no money, no hope, just my 2 children, and a lot of fear for the future. Today, I look around this table and see I have the family I always dreamed of having." "It's not blood ties that make a family," added Anthony. "It's bonds of love and solidarity." "And of trust," Dr. Sebastian added. "When people trust each other, they can face any difficulty." "And the courage to help when needed," said John, raising his glass in an informal toast. 2 years later, the story of Mary and her family had become known in the region as an example of how solidarity can transform lives. Dr. Sebastian wrote about the case for a medical journal, highlighting the importance of community support in the recovery of families in crisis. The article was reprinted in newspapers in several cities and inspired the creation of similar support networks. Emma Grace, now 11, had become an intelligent and determined young girl who dreamed of becoming a teacher like Eunice. Little Pete, at 9, showed an interest in medicine and always accompanied Dr. Sebastian on home visits. Mary completed her nursing studies and became the first official nurse in Williamsburg. Her work alongside Dr. Sebastian saved many lives and brought medical care to families who had never had access to proper treatment. Anthony became not only the clinic administrator, but also an advocate for the rights of small landowners. He helped create an association that advised families on their legal rights and protected them from scams similar to the one he had suffered. John and Eunice renewed their marriage vows in a simple ceremony that celebrated not only the love between them, but also the extended family they had created. On that occasion, they officially named Mary and Anthony as their wedding sponsors, and Emma Grace and Little Pete as their grandchildren of the heart. Grace opened a small inn that became known for welcoming families in distress, offering not only lodging, but also emotional support and practical guidance. Mrs. Rose, even retired, continued to be the matriarch of Dr. Sebastian's house and the grandmother to all the children in the community. Aunt Beatrice moved permanently to Williamsburg and became one of the town's most beloved people, known for her generosity and wisdom. 5 years after the events that changed their lives, Mary was at a train station again. But this time the situation was completely different. She was waiting for the arrival of a young family that Dr. Sebastian had met in Boston, a mother with 3 small children who had lost her husband in an accident and had nowhere to go. "Do you think they'll accept our help?" Mary asked Anthony, who was by her side. "If they're in the same situation you were in 5 years ago, they will," he replied, smiling. "And if they don't? Then we'll gently insist until they realize that sometimes accepting help is the bravest thing one can do. The train arrived promptly at 3 in the afternoon. Among the passengers who got off, Mary easily identified the family they were waiting for, a young woman, clearly exhausted, holding the hands of 2 small children while carrying a baby in her arms. Mary approached slowly, remembering how suspicious she had felt when John offered help for the first time. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Are you Clara Sanford?" The woman looked up, revealing a beautiful face marked by sadness and worry. "That's me. Who's asking?" "My name is Mary Elizabeth. Dr. Sebastian asked me to come pick you up." "Oh, yes. He said someone would come." "How was the trip?" "Long. The children are tired and hungry." Mary looked at the 3 little ones and saw in them the reflection of her own children years earlier, scared, tired, but still trusting their mother to protect them. "Let's go home," she said, reaching out to help with the luggage. "We have warm food waiting for you." "Miss Mary, I can't pay for lodging right now. Dr. Sebastian said you would help me find work, but—" "Clara," Mary gently interrupted, "5 years ago I was exactly where you are now, alone with 2 children, no money and no hope. A good man offered help, and today I have a life I never imagined possible. And now you do the same for other people. Now we pass on what we received. That's how the world becomes a better place." Clara began to cry softly. "I was so afraid." "The fear will pass," said Mary, hugging her. "And soon you'll be helping another family in need, just as we're helping you today." As they walked toward the wagon where Anthony was waiting, Mary reflected on how life had come full circle. From a desperate woman at a train station, she had become someone capable of offering hope to others in the same situation. "Emma Grace will love having other children to play with," she said to Clara. "And little Pete will want to show all his toys to your children." "Are they your children?" "They are. And they're also John and Eunice's children, who took us in. And they're grandchildren of Mrs. Rose, who takes care of all of us, and they're nephews of Grace, who always has a special treat for them. You know, Clara, family isn't just who we're born with. Family is who chooses to stay with us." The timid smile that appeared on Clara's face was the first glimmer of hope Mary saw in those tired eyes. During the ride home, Clara told her story. Her husband had died in an accident during the construction of the railroad, leaving her with 3 small children and no source of income. Her husband's family had rejected her, and she had no close relatives. "How did you know I existed?" asked Clara. "Dr. Sebastian has a network of contacts that identify families in difficult situations. When he learned about your situation, he came to us to see if we could help." "And you always do this?" "Whenever we can. 3 years ago, we helped a widow with 5 children. Today, she has a small sewing shop and is doing very well. Last year, we took in an elderly man who had lost his home in a flood. Now he lives with us and is like a grandfather to all the children. It sounds like a dream. It's not a dream, Clara. It's reality. But a reality we built all together day after day with hard work and lots of love." When they arrived at the main house, where everyone was gathered to welcome the new family, Clara was impressed by the warm reception. Eunice had prepared a special dinner. John brought toys he had made for the children. Dr. Sebastian examined everyone to check their health. Grace appeared with clean, warm clothes. Mrs. Rose had a fresh cake coming out of the oven. Aunt Beatrice brought a knitted shawl she had made especially for Clara. Emma Grace and little Pete, now 13 and 11 years old respectively, took on the role of older siblings, helping the younger children feel at home. During dinner, Clara asked the same question Mary had asked years before. "Why do you do all this for people you don't even know?" It was Emma Grace who answered, with the wisdom of someone who had grown up seeing the best of human nature. "Because when you help someone, you're not just helping that person. You're helping create a world where anyone can be helped when they need it. And because," added little Pete, "one day we needed help too, and good people helped us. Now it's our turn to be the good people in someone else's life." Clara looked around the table and saw smiling faces, kind eyes, hands extended in welcoming gestures. For the first time in months, she felt that maybe everything would work out. 6 months later, Clara was working as a teaching assistant at Eunice's school. Her children were healthy and happy, and she had become an integral part of the community that had welcomed her. And when it was her turn to help the next family in need, Clara fully understood the cycle of kindness that Mary had described. It wasn't charity, it wasn't pity, it wasn't obligation. It was simply the understanding that we all need help sometimes, and that life becomes more beautiful when we help each other. The Williamsburg train station became a special symbol for all these families. It was where people who needed a new chance arrived, and it was from there that they left years later, transformed and ready to transform other lives. Mary often took Emma Grace and little Pete for walks at the station on Sundays. They would sit on the same bench where she had waited for the train on that rainy July afternoon so many years ago. "Do you remember that day?" she would sometimes ask. "I remember being very cold," little Pete would say. "And I remember that Mom was sad," Emma Grace would add. "And do you remember what I felt?" "Fear," Emma Grace would answer. "And loneliness," little Pete would complete. "And now, when we look at that bench, what do you feel?" "Gratitude," the two would say in chorus. "Why?" "Because that's where our new life began," Emma Grace would explain. "If that train hadn't been cancelled, if it hadn't rained, if Mr. John hadn't shown up, we'll never know how it might have been," Mary would interrupt. "But we know how it was, and it was perfect." 10 years had passed since that rainy afternoon at the station. Mary and Anthony had already helped more than 20 families rebuild their lives. Emma Grace graduated as a teacher and married a young doctor who came to work with Dr. Sebastian. Little Pete followed in his mentor's footsteps and was studying medicine in the capital. Dr. Sebastian's clinic had become a small but complete hospital. Eunice's school was considered one of the best in the region. The support network that began with an act of kindness at a train station had expanded to several neighboring towns. John, now retired from the railroad, dedicated his time to making furniture and toys that were distributed free to families in need. Eunice, also retired from formal teaching, had created a community library that served the entire region. Grace married a kind widower who helped her run the inn, which had become a benchmark for hospitality and social support. Mrs. Rose, at 80 years old, remained the matriarch of everyone and the guardian of the stories that connected the families. Aunt Beatrice had become the community's official counselor, the person everyone turned to when they needed wisdom and guidance. Dr. Sebastian, now with completely white hair, continued to see patients and train new doctors committed to humanized medicine. One Sunday afternoon, exactly 10 years after that first meeting, Mary was at the station again. This time she wasn't waiting for or helping anyone. She was simply there to think. Anthony approached and sat beside her on the historic bench. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking that 10 years ago I thought my life was over. And in fact it was just beginning. Do you regret anything?" "Just one thing. Taking so long to understand that accepting help isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of intelligence." "And what are you most proud of?" "Having learned that the best way to thank for a kindness received is to pass that kindness forward." At that moment, a train arrived at the station. Among the passengers who got off, Mary saw a familiar scene. A young woman with 2 small children, clearly lost and worried. "Shall we?" asked Anthony, smiling. "Let's go," replied Mary, rising from the bench. They approached the woman with the same kindness John had shown years before. "Excuse me," said Mary, "do you need help?" And so, the cycle began once again. End of story. What an incredible story, don't you think? Now tell me, what did you think of Mary and her family's journey? Do you believe this kind of solidarity still exists in the world? Share with us your own experiences of kindness that transformed lives. Leave your like if the story moved you, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming narratives.